For years, tribal leaders across the country have been trying to educate the public on the high rate of missing and murdered Indigenous people. This summer, producer Ruth Brown spent time on two of the state's reservations, speaking with tribal members about the scale of the problem, what needs to change, and the voices that need to be heard.
Each year, about 80 Indigenous Idahoans are entered into the missing person database run by the National Crime Information Center, according to a 2021 Boise State University report. That rate is nearly double that of missing Idahoans of every other race. Many of those people are later located or taken out of the NCIC system. Others will stay in that system for decades.
In our neck of the woods, we've had a young gal that has been missing since 1987.
Tina Marie Finley went missing from the Coeur d'Alene Reservation after attending a birthday party in Tenside in 1988.
She's still gone. She hasn't been returned to her family. She hasn't been properly buried. But there's many more like that, statewide and nationwide.
Idaho Reports went to Lapwai and Plummer this summer to talk to Nez Perce and Coeur d'Alene tribal members about the national epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Idaho is home to 5 federally recognized Indigenous tribes.
I think what I've learned the most from being on the commission is just how widespread this issue is and how difficult it is for families of missing and murdered Indigenous people to come and have to tell their story over and over and relive that trauma again and again in order to get attention on the issue.
Nez Perce Chief Judge Natasha Anderson sits on the Bureau of Indian Affairs Not Invisible Act Commission, formed after the act was passed in 2020.
I think the main goal of the commission is to elevate the voices of families on the ground that have been crying out for attention to the issue. The statistics of Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women that go missing, are so high, more than double the national average, that something needs to be fixed, something needs to change.
Other examples of missing Indigenous people in Idaho include Matthew Bronco of Fort Hall, last seen on March 20th of 2019, or Casey Ross of Plummer, who was last heard from on March 19th of 2020, and her last known location was Spokane, Washington. Solving the problem isn't simple, nor is it easy to point to one reason as to why the rate of missing Indigenous people remains so high. Jurisdictional barriers continue to be a problem in Idaho and nationwide.
I think the most pivotal thing that could happen is that Idaho would amend its definition of peace officer to include tribal law enforcement officers. Right now, because tribal law enforcement officers aren't included in that definition, that really restricts a lot of the things that they can do, as well as the ability of local or state law enforcement agencies to collaborate on investigations and things like that. The communication and willingness of agencies to collaborate and share data or information is just not what it should be when you have someone missing.
There's no central data collecting, so that's part of the problem, because every agency uses their own data, and none of it, the right hand doesn't talk to the left hand, nobody talks to each other, so that's a big problem. And, of course, and then there's the tribal sovereignty, and, there are some issues revolving around that, and reluctance to share, which I think is going to change. I think that there's been a lot more awareness going on in the past few years, and tribes all over the U.S. are taking notice and understanding that some of the challenges are within our own tribes, that we do need to share some data. We don't need everybody's data, we just need whatever pertains to missing and murdered Native people.
Bernie Lassart co-chairs the Missing and Murdered Indigenous People Subcommittee. She said tribal members who live off-reservation or on other reservations often get misclassified as being Caucasian or Hispanic. That creates the potential for undercounting missing Indigenous people.
We need to work together with the county, with the state, with other tribes, with our federal partners in collecting this data, so we know how many are actually missing. We need the help with investigations, because tribes are pretty compact and they have no jurisdiction even across the county line, so we need that extra support. One of the biggest things that I hope that comes out of this is that we do have agreements to work with one another.
What I've been heartened to see since I took the bench for the Nez Perce tribe in January is the local judges of the Nez Perce County. We've been working in a sort of Lewis Clark Valley DV response team. So building those relationships, getting to know who our partners are, who our counterparts are. That doesn't just stop there. The Nez Perce Reservation spans 5 counties, and each of those counties work differently with the tribe.
Outside of jurisdictional issues, some point to the historical persecution of Indigenous people as one of the reasons that the rate of violence against Native people, especially Indigenous women, remains so high.
There is 400 to 500 years of settler colonization and dehumanization and displacement and violence and forced sterilization, which makes these numbers offensive, but also unsurprising. We are not seen, we are not heard, we are not deemed worthy, we are not human enough to uplift in a way where resources and energy is invested in our safety and in our wellness. This is systemic, it's institutionalized, and it's the narrative and the conception that people have of who Indigenous people are. This isn't an Indian community issue. This isn't just about Native folks in Idaho. This is a community safety issue.
In 2022, the Idaho legislature established an alert system specific to endangered and missing Idahoans. That system brings some hope to tribal members.
If we respond singularly, one at a time, to big, sensationalized cases, then how many others, white, black, brown, or otherwise, go and stay missing without response because they're not sensationalized, because they don't have a social media presence? I think that this alert system is an equalizer, at the very least, in ensuring that energy and resources are poured into everybody who goes missing, because we all deserve to be home, we all deserve to be safe.
But the system isn't used in every missing person's case. According to records pulled by Idaho Reports, the new alert system has not yet been used to help locate a missing Indigenous person in Idaho. Before requesting an alert, police must believe the missing adult is in jeopardy of immediate danger or death.
We haven't had any requests for an Indigenous person to be issued on the alert. The law enforcement agency must feel that there's enough imminent bodily harm or death to immediately push out to cell phones. In one case we have as a current case, there's not any imminent bodily harm or death with that person. So as soon as we have somebody that has that, then we definitely would issue an alert.
In other words, just because an alert hasn't been issued for an Indigenous person yet, that does not mean that no tribal members have gone missing.
This year our area of focus is training, especially training for law enforcement and for community members. And so we want to make sure our law enforcement understand how to handle a missing person case, especially when it comes to a missing Indigenous person.
Lessart knows families on her reservation that are still searching for or mourning for their family members, like those who knew and loved Tina Marie Finley.
I've worked very closely with her sisters, and they mourn for her every day. They haven't been able to put her to rest. And that's what we want, is to bring our people back home.
Joining me to discuss her reporting is Ruth Brown. Ruth, thanks so much for all your hard work on this. One of the things that you really explore in the online version of your story, which viewers can find at idahoreports.org, is how so much of this data is siloed between different agencies.
Correct. It is one of the fundamental problems, I think, with this issue. So part of the problem is the National Crime Information Center lists actively missing cases. For example, which is a different set of data than the Idaho State Police Clearinghouse. For example, right now there are currently 3 active cases of missing Indigenous people in the state of Idaho. That is not
In NCIC specifically.
Yes, in NCIC. That is not representative of the number of Indigenous people that go missing every year, or the rate at which they go missing every year. It's important to remember that Indigenous people go missing at twice the rate of every other race in the state of Idaho. And so...
And many of those missing people are ultimately found.
Yes,
and
sometimes
taken out
found
of that
dead
system.
or alive, yes.
Right, and that's part of the reason in the disparity between the numbers of active missing cases and the high rate that we're seeing. One of them is a snapshot in any given day, and one of them is an annual look at how many people are reported missing.
Correct. If someone is in NCIC, there has been a formal police report, and they're a designated missing person. There are other cases that maybe it's not a formal police report, but they've inquired about, my brother, my sister, my spouse hasn't come home in a few days. And when we're talking about adults, it is a free country. You don't have to report to anyone, and so that makes it complicated. Children, for example, are automatically put in NCIC when they go missing, of course.
Whether they're runaways or go missing under other circumstances.
Correct. Whereas adults are not automatically entered. So it makes it very complicated. Additionally, all of the law enforcement agencies across Idaho, we have tribal police, state police, local police, do not necessarily always share data and information about people who have gone missing. This makes it very complicated. It's both a jurisdictional issue and maybe in part a cultural issue. I felt very privileged this summer to talk to tribal members about missing and murdered Indigenous folks and what they see as issues that could improve communication among law enforcement agencies. I talk in my story at length about data, but also changes that could be made in the state that could help the problem. But the scale of it is shocking. I cannot stress that enough. The rate at which Native people go missing in the state and across the country is shocking. I don't think we should be entirely surprised because the rate at which Indigenous folks experience violence is also shocking. The DOJ will report that I think it's 84% of women who are Indigenous will experience violence in their lifetime. 81% of Indigenous men will experience violence in their lifetime. And so I cannot express the importance of this enough.
Ultimately, there are a lot of intersections here with, the justice system, with investigations, with public health, and as we've talked about in education and justice and public health, that you can't really solve a problem if you don't fully understand it. Real quick before we move on, what was your sense as you conducted these interviews about the appetite for tackling these really difficult issues and solving them?
So you talked about you can't fix a problem. You also can't fix a problem if you don't talk about it. You can't fix a problem if you don't listen to the parties involved. One of the things I heard over and over is that the Indigenous folks that I spoke with do not feel heard. There is a missing and murdered Indigenous people subcommittee that will offer recommendations to the state. I hope that those recommendations are heard by the legislature and state authorities, but I think there is a growing appetite for it. It's becoming more and more.
And you report on those recommendations in your online story, which people can find at idahoreports.org. Thanks so much, Ruth.
Correct.